Probably.
The Eustoners when you were off to your retreat in Scotland.
Yes, that's a little while ago. But yes, it's interesting to be here, isn't it? I'm thinking that one thing that makes it a bit difficult is quite a lot of the houses have been extended.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this I'm sure John didn't give permission for this.
Yeah. And you notice the landscaping's gone as well. Just
Some
how
of it
much,
has, yeah.
how much cars
Yeah.
dominate if you look across the road.
Homeworld was about two things. One, bringing more people to Milton Keynes. Two, demonstrating to government that we were able as a corporation to move towards a much greater emphasis on the private sector. You must bear in mind that the Thatcher government had come in with a much clearer view about how they were going to run the country, less government, more private sector. And up until that time, Milton Keynes had been a very socially orientated public sector vision with mostly rented housing. So it was important that we were able to show that we were encouraging private sector development, and Homeworld was very much about that.
Where should we start? Tim, you know, where the question is. We'll take a right, shall we? Bradwell Common is one of the grid squares right in the centre of Milton Keynes, so you can walk within 5 minutes from the Bradwell Common site to the shopping centre. And I think that says it all, that we were prepared to put private housing right at the centre of planning, and indeed to encourage people to live near the city centre.
I did the design and technical coordination. We started out with a kind of development plan for how it would go. We sort of tested it for its feasibility and the flexibility. It's very important to be flexible because we didn't know what we were going to get. Before the builders came on site, it was important to have things in place so that all they had to do was just put their building up and connect up to the utilities. So we had to have the roads in place, the squares in place, and that was about it really. The landscape as well, of course. That was kind of like the physical preparation of the site, but on the other hand, there were all the other administrative things going on as well to get them there.
I was project manager for Homeworld, and that involved, first of all, overseeing the layout, the housing layout, dividing it into building plots where individual houses could be erected, and beyond that, marketing the plots to punters who might be developers such as Lang or Wimpey, and trying to create a rich tapestry of different types of projects. But the main concept initially was to promote private housing in Milton Keynes.
Because the whole thing was laid out in a 4 metre by 4 metre grid.
Yeah.
So every plot was a multiple of 4 metres. So you probably got about 8 metres more in this house.
So how did you decide who went on what plot?
I don't know really. I think it was a question of fitting. I mean, I don't know who the first one was that came. I think the pyramid was one of the first ones because it was a kind of not a tame developer, but a known developer. Greenwood Homes was doing work for us. They were in the frame quite early, and they were doing this. They came in with this pyramid. It wasn't quite the same as it is now. It was a bit sleeker when they brought it in. We thought, well, that would be a good thing in the centre of the site, really, and it would hit you from the entrance coming in from the car park.
When I arrived as a young surveyor to work for the Development Corporation in 1978, private housing was the poor relation of public housing, and the process of getting it to happen was typical of any sort of public body. There was an architect's department, a planning department, a surveyor's department, and so forth. And clearly that wasn't going to work because it didn't give enough emphasis to the project of getting private housing on the ground. So in 1979, the private housing unit was formed.
The PHU, Private Housing Unit, was a multidisciplinary team charged with delivering private housing within the Development Corporation. So we had architects, engineers and surveyors working alongside each other and negotiating with developers and their architects to get schemes designed and built.
So the private housing unit found its way into success really quite quickly. We did some good deals with developers. Also, it provided the structure from which to build Homeworld and Energy World.
Homeworld happened because I was director at the time, responsible at the corporation for publicity and promotion, and I picked up the idea and ran with it. And basically, I suppose it happened because I took control of it. The idea originally came from David Locke, one of the planners, in a casual conversation based on a historic event at Letchworth Garden City in the early days when they did a very similar thing to promote housing.
I'd been struck by my reading about the impact of the Cheap Cottages exhibition in Letchworth in 1905. Having trouble with the first garden city, getting people to take it seriously as a place to move to. So they organised a public exhibition of prototype houses, and they laid on a temporary train halt so that people could come up on a free ticket from London, spend the day looking at all these show houses and get back on the train. And the houses that were built, they were all designed to raise people's imagination about what houses could look like, because most people were living in London suburbs or slums. And secondly, to make people aware that Letchworth could offer a house with a garden and easy access from London.
It was in 1979 the first seeds were sown. I think it was a chap called David Parker, who was American, that came in as a housing advisor.
My recollection is that the initial idea for Homeworld came from David Parker. I don't remember where Fred first met David Parker, but David Parker was working in the States for a new town development corporation, the New York State Urban Development Corporation, and had a lot of experience, more than we had in Milton Keynes, in building new towns with private developers. David said, well, why don't you do a major housing exhibition to demonstrate the Milton Keynes' willingness to attract private developers and bring a lot of customers up as well.
When I walked through the doors into the pavilion at Wavendon Tower for the launch event to go up onto the stage and address the gathering there, I was confronted by over 150 people, house builders and their representatives, who'd come along to hear what this thing was all about. And the response from questions afterwards and people who were at the meeting coming back to ask questions about what they could do, how they could get involved, was amazing. So my memories of that are that it was a real turning point in the process of putting Homeworld together.
The main incentive for a builder was that if he produced a really good house in Homeworld, there was a better chance of him getting a development site somewhere else in the city. It wasn't all done on finance. It was done partly on whether we thought a builder was going to fit well into Milton Keynes generally. And the private housing unit was always developing that theme of trying to make housing more interesting, more important, more acceptable and more high quality.
Some of the developers just got on quietly with what they were doing. You know, I think the Moleham House, for instance, I don't remember anything cropping up about that. They'd been doing work in Milton Keynes, just down the road in Connibara for years and years. And they kind of just got a design sorted out quickly, got the building regs for it, started building, and they were one of the first to finish, I think, and just went away. We didn't hear anything about them.
The project we were involved with, which was building this Scandinavian or Swedish timber frame house. It was called an Arneby-hus. Very exciting, but it was very difficult because it was like having a small housing estate being built, but with 20 or 30 individual contractors.
Well, we had a character called George Mackenzie, who was a Glaswegian, I think. He was the kind of on-site marshal, making sure that builders didn't fall out with each other.
Normally, with a small housing estate, you'd have one Bovis Homes or whoever would be building the estate, and they would be able to coordinate, build it sensibly in a controlled manner. With Homeworld 81, every single project was managed by a different contractor, and each contractor was arranging his own deliveries of materials, bricks and timber trusses and that sort of thing. And you'd get the situation where I was trying to get all my bricks delivered to clad the outside of this timber frame building, and the brick delivery lorry couldn't get anywhere near the site. It all came together in the end, but it was a bit of a nightmare actually doing it.
In the height of activity, when it was going off between Christmas and Easter of 1981, every day I would go home and have my dinner, and the whole family would pile into the car, and we'd have to go to Homeworld because I had to walk around and see what had been done that day. During the day, I'd be in the office most of the time, sort of fielding issues and coordinating things. And my long-suffering family all came with me. I think they knew every word of every song on the Mamas and Papas best hits.
Who was the landscape architect?
Mike Osherwood. He was heading out the landscape thing. And I think there were three elements to the landscape. One was the street trees and the street views, including the kind of hedging that went up there. And then he used to cluster those around the two roundabouts. So that was a kind of street scene. And then there was the garden courts, pocket park. Well, he just did a landscape unit job on it,
More mature trees than you would normally
Yes,
have.
I think all the trees and all the planting you put in, it was all a little bit more mature than it would have been if it was a fresh estate. And then the third element was the gardens of the houses themselves. And all the landscape architects in the landscape unit had one or two gardens to do, where they let their imaginations run right, if not their budgets. And so every house had a quite attractive garden in the making. I think the three of them together, those elements, came together very well and did form this thread that held everything together.
You tend to get different types of people wanting to take part. There were the people who had something to sell, the people who had the kit houses. There were developers who were already in Milton Keynes, such as Wellmar particularly, who thought that they ought to be in because they were already in. There were developers, I think, that wanted to get into Milton Keynes. And there were entrepreneurs like Roger Walker from New Zealand, who just saw it as, I think, a bit of fun and to market themselves or an idea that they had.
Yeah, and this still looks good, doesn't it? I mean,
It does. I love that New Zealand house. I think that's wonderfully crazy. And
yeah.
I mean, this was the one that was a real struggle to get it.
Oh
Yeah,
it was a grind. I mean, with Peter Lamb worked on that building for about 2 months, I think, non-stop. He was the one who had to get building regulations permission for it, And Graham Alsop in the building control section of the council, he was very helpful.
But it's one of those things where obviously the corporation recognised it and helped out.
Oh yes.
Everybody helped out to make it happen.
So I'd been on several trips to London just to enjoy the architecture and the theatre and stuff. So one day I was there, and the New Zealand High Commission, who keep tabs on what's going on, said, "Look, there's this international exhibition in Milton Keynes, and we think you should go into it." And being the last of the English new towns, I was quite fascinated to see, what had been learnt from the previous new towns. I do have a company in New Zealand called Vintage Homes. Vintage Homes was the vehicle that built this house and financed this house.
I think the two New Zealand houses were object lessons in the opposite way of doing things, because we had one which was Lockwood Homes, which was another one of these quiet ones, which I never heard any trouble or problems from Lockwood Homes whatsoever. The house arrived on a container, and they got a crew sorted out, and they put it up in no time at all and connected things up and went away, and it's done and dusted, if you like. Right next door to that is Vintage Homes with Roger Walker, and totally different approach to building here. I think all that arrived from New Zealand was a joiner and his toolbox. Got off the plane, and then he had to find his way to Milton Keynes, get some accommodation, which my wife fixed up for them actually, and then set to finding material, getting wood bought, and the rest. And I just remember him being on site. There's a staircase with a stair tower which is kind of sticking out from the building, and he was there with his hammer and chisel notching out the recesses for the treads to go in and the risers to go in. It went round this thing, but it ended up a very attractive house, and probably the most distinctive on the site, to be frank. It was nail-biting stuff. I think getting it to that stage,
Yeah, there was a few dramas. I found a New Zealand builder who said that he would go over and build the house, and we agreed a price with him. And he went over, and he was over several months earlier than I was supposed to go over and my job was to control the painting and sort of finish off the house, do the finishing touches. But unfortunately, for one reason or another, he got way behind. And when I arrived, the house was well behind, its program. So I had to pitch in, and I had to employ extra staff to get it built. And there were dramas, like I was hanging up pictures, I remember one day, and I put the nails through one of the water pipes in the walls and things like that. And the High Commission provided all the plants. They had this idea that our house would be a little bit of New Zealand in the English countryside. So they provided all the flaxes and sort of New Zealand species of plants, which we eagerly took advantage of. And so they were all growing nicely. And then various companies in New Zealand, like carpet companies, provided the carpet. And in fact, there were so many visitors through the house during the show, the time of the show, that the carpet actually wore out and had to be replaced. We had to work very long hours because we were behind time. And one night, there were three of us, we were working, and it was snowing, and we all had mild hypothermia. And at about 9 o'clock, we said, we better go down to the local Indian restaurant and have some curry. Anyway, the local Indian restaurant, I said, "What's the hottest curry you've got, sir?" And he said, "We've got a special Tindaloo, but it's not for European tastes." And I said, "Is it hot?" And he said, "My word, it's hot." And I said, "Look, I need that. I've got mild hypothermia." Anyway, so this plate was delivered, and there was a waiter standing behind the manager who brought the plate of Tindaloo. I took one mouthful and then sort of breathed fire. And the chap behind stepped forward and he said, "You'll be needing the yogurt, sir."
One challenge was the weather. I can't remember what the whole of April was like in 1981, but I can remember on the 3rd of May, because it was my daughter's 3rd birthday, there was a huge snowstorm which collapsed one of the marquees. And you know, that was a lovely panic. That was what happens when you try to put on an exhibition.
The day before it was due to be finished, and you know, George was going around exhorting people to get a move on and telling me, coming back, there's a problem here with this, can you blah blah blah. And then I think eventually the site closed about 6 o'clock or something like that, and there was a meeting. David Crew was chairing it because he was the executive director for the project, and the technical and PR people were sitting around the table and just going through the checklist. We've done this, and have you finished, John? You know, everything. And there was just one tiny thing that needed doing. I can't remember what it was. Maybe a lock for a gate or something like that, you know. And I said, well, there's just this thing that needs doing, but it'll be done about 8 o'clock in the morning, well before the opening ceremony. And then there was a quiet, and I got the steely-eyed look from David Crew, and the eyes closed a little bit, and he didn't say anything actually. He just shook his head twice, very slowly. So I excused myself and got it done that night. but then, and then that was it. The next morning, everything was done. It was fantastic.
This is quite interesting. In doing the research for the anniversary, what you realise is how much the housing sector has changed, the private housing sector, and how builders have merged, formed, disappeared. And
Yes.
and here, I mean, you've got the Wilcon, the White House, the Clipper. You know, they don't exist anymore. I don't know who owns them. Barrett's, they're still here, the only one. And this was Lang, their super homes, and Lang's have disappeared from the housing market. This was Abbey Homesteads,
Yeah.
and they were a sort of builder in Milton Keynes, weren't they?
Yes.
Leith Hill,
Yes.
and now they've disappeared. And S&S, who built the Potton House, you know, they regional builder disappeared. Molan, who did contracting and then sale housing, you know, they've disappeared. They've all merged and things. In 40 years, the whole housing sector has changed, and there's sort of regional builders like S&S who just disappeared.
I remember an L-shaped house like that with a big conservatory in the niche.
Yeah, that one.
The money programme.
That's
Money programme house,
Yeah.
BBC.
Yeah.
The house, it was a Langs who built it, and I think it was based on a super home module, you know, framework.
Yeah.
And they got two of them, put them at right angles to form an L shape. That's what this is. And then John Doggart did the kind of energy overlay on it,
Did he?
and put the conservatory into the angle of the L shape, if you like, and got all his thermal performance coming out of that. And being the BBC involved with the money programme, it was, got a lot of publicity for it. I remember quite a few articles.
And I think it
saw
continued
about it, you know.
over a year or two, didn't it?
Oh yes, it did continue. They went back and revisited. The other thing was Valerie Singleton was presenting the money programme there. And there was a generation grew up with her and Blue Peter, wasn't there, you know. And so I think it probably reached a lot further than many people might have given it credit for.
It's a house designed and built under the auspices of the Money Programme. We're calling it Future Home 2000. Very much a house of the future, but incorporating all the most advanced technology that industry has to offer right here and now.
Since the oil crises of the early 70s, we've become all too aware of the finite nature of our energy. Industry has spent very considerable sums researching new design ideas, and first fruits of the research are sprouting rather at random across the country. A new breed of architect has already emerged to apply these new concepts, and among the leaders in the field is energy-conscious design, who've already completed a number of projects here in Britain, as well as carrying out research for the government and the EEC into low-energy construction. And it's the energy-conscious design team who've drawn up the plans for our future Home 2000.
Most of this was done by my partner, David Tarrant. And I asked David a few weeks ago, I said, well, how did that happen? They said they just came and asked us. Lang had seen that it was an opportunity for promoting Lang housing. It was them, I think, who got the BBC involved. We started on Friday evening, and by Monday we had to have the design done. So the timescale was extremely short. And then I can't remember, the working drawings was another 2 weeks or something like that. It was extremely quick.
When we were allocated our site in the exhibition last November, it looked like this. Indeed, just 6 days ago, there was just a concrete slab there. But last Tuesday, all that changed in a quite remarkable way. Val Singleton was there.
It's 8 o'clock and it's only just light, but already one of these trailers has been unloaded and work has started. They're hammering away in the background, beginning to put up the lower floor walls. By the end of today, the major construction of the house will be completed. All the walls will be finished, and the only thing left to put on will be the roof. Our Future Home 2000 started life as a list of cutting instructions similar to a semi-detached, saving hours of work on site. So efficient is this system that a team of 4 men can manufacture all the components for 25 houses in just 1 week. Day 2, and within an hour the roof has been felted and battened and is ready for tiling. The tiles are delivered, and like everything else today in the building industry, unloading is automated so as not to hold up work on site. Inside, the doors are being fixed, and attention now turns to what Future Home 2000 will hope to achieve in energy conservation.
We were very keen indeed to promote the idea that we were using far too much energy and that we had to cut it down.
As you may remember, we hope that our house will be able to save 60% of all fuel bills. Yet at the same time, it has to be a compact family house.
There were other things that the house had, for instance, that were new. A thing called double glazing. We all think that's all normal now, but 40 years ago, it wasn't very well known, and certainly not the one that we used on Homeworld, which makes it much, much more efficient. We did something with the controls. You know, we're all used to button controls now, but there were no button controls in those days. So you could run the house in a much, much better way, a much more economic way than because you could tailor the heating to just when you wanted the heat instead of just having to switch it on for long periods. But the whole lot of other things in the house which just weren't around at that time were there. For instance, there were low energy lights there. People had tungsten bulbs. Now they don't. So that was an example of the things that were there. Some of the things didn't happen in 20 years, are only just happening in 40 years, like the home office. Okay, it's a very simple concept. It was more complex then because cabling and wiring were it wasn't wireless in those days. The idea that you didn't have to go to work every day in order to do work, that was an idea that we floated then. That's something that even after 20 years, after the 2000, had not arrived in any way. And I mean, we were doing things also. For instance, there's Valerie Singleton driving away in an all-electric vehicle, which was to become commonplace within by the year 2000, because that's when the house was designed to be, to leading up to. Well, of course, it's taken a very, very much longer time for it all to happen than that.
In 1981, I was the chief engineer for a division within a national house building company, and a group of myself and my colleagues came down from the Midlands specifically to go round Homeworld. And that really was our only involvement. It transpired that our chairman had a vision of establishing a new region in Milton Keynes, and I was offered that position later on in the year. And because we had a housing development in Milton Keynes, we just took over 2 of the show houses for offices initially, but we needed somewhere to live. So Carol and I put aside 2 or 3 weekends as often as we could to come down to Milton Keynes, stay overnight, look at as many houses as possible. And then one afternoon I said, let me go and show you this Homeworld exhibition where there's some really weird houses, Carol, you will not believe. So we looked at Homeworld and were just driving around out of interest, really. And there was a for sale board, I think it was Taylor's estate agents were selling the Money Programme house. And I said, that was a particularly nice house, Carol. And we went inside it, and there'd been a burst. So the ceilings were down and the carpets were screwed up in corners and rolled up. And I said to Carol, you can't really imagine what it was like when we came round, but there were thousands of people. Anyway, that was about November time. I dealt with David Holliday, who was the MD of Super Homes at the time, Lang subsidiary. So he said, well, if you buy this house, I'll get everything sorted out for you. And true to his word, all the ceilings were put back, all the decor was done, all the carpets were relaid, and we moved in. And that was how we got to be in the Money Programme house. There must have been some sort of contractual obligation from Super Homes to allow the Money Programme to commentate on people living in the house. And I suppose we were in our 30s, we were a youngish couple with a young family. I was in the industry, so we were a pretty good couple for them, really. In fact, we were filmed moving in. From the 4th of January, we were on film, and then it was filmed on a regular basis for about 18 months or 2 years, I think.
We were both concerned about the high technology aspect of it all, because it was blown up really beyond necessity, I think, when we first looked at the house and were told so much about it. And when we came to live here, and when everybody had disappeared and we were left on our own, we managed to find that it was quite straightforward, really. And if one applied one's mind in quite a logical manner, then the house itself works quite well, and I don't think it's that daunting at all.
We had so many people wanting to monitor their particular aspect or their particular feature that we had people in the house virtually every day with monitors and meters and questions, and it was fascinating. I absolutely loved it.
I think inevitably there was a worry that there won't be a large turnout. People wouldn't be turned on by the idea of visiting a load of houses.
We had 140,000 visitors. I was at the MKDC's exhibition tent for many of the days, and people just loved it. It was just an exciting exhibition to come to and have a day out in Milton Keynes.
I went back later towards the end of the show. When the show was closing, the exhibition was closing. People really embraced the whole idea and the concept, and the public clearly did as well.
It was a huge success in terms of the population, the public. They loved it. The numbers of people watching the Money Programme doubled. It was by far the most successful thing that they'd ever had on any programme.
There was great enthusiasm from the public for the exhibition as an exhibition piece. But to me, they were all kind of voyeuristic in their approach to it. They wanted to see what the decor was and the bedrooms were like, and furniture and stuff like that. Oh, this is a nice house, look at that kitchen. And that was kind of the level at which the mass public seemed to take it. They didn't even consider, I don't think, the technical innovations that were on display there. And to that extent, I was a bit disappointed. They just didn't have this vision about a future.
The one house that had the biggest queues of people to go in and have a look were not the beautiful Scandinavian minimalist houses. It was the S&H Potton Tudor-Beaton house in the corner, and that had a queue about 150 yards long to get into it. I thought that tells you something about where our current design tastes lie as a people.
Mostly people were very excited about it, but I remember there was a woman of a certain age who said, "I could never live here. I could never here. This is horrible. I could never live here." And I said, "Madam, nobody is asking you to live here." But anyway, it was generally very positive. And I think that, I don't know what our throughput of people, of visitors was compared with some of the other houses. Within the house, we had a document of expressions of interest. And I think we had something like 500 people said they were interested in further information. So there was, I would say, a large amount of interest.
This is going to sound really odd, but because I was born in Milton Keynes, I'd never visited Homeworld. I knew about the 3 exhibitions, Homeworld, Energy World and Future World, but Future World was the only one I had visited. So it wasn't until after we moved here that I actually realised what a fantastic place Homeworld was, and as a local historian I got really interested.
Yeah. But strangely enough, at that time in 1981 I actually lived in London. And I was looking for a house, and I went to the Ideal Home exhibition, and they were offering free coach trips out here. So I hopped on the bus, and I can remember actually coming up Coles Hill Place and actually seeing the A-frame, which I thought was wonderful. It was very sort of continental. I went to the exhibition and went through the houses. I can't remember this one, strangely enough.
We've lived here since September 2012. Within a week of moving in here, we felt like we have lived here forever. It is just such a comfortable house to live in. It's just got such a lovely feeling to it. And of course, Homeworld is walking distance from the city centre, Sainsbury's, the station. Yeah, Homeworld is actually very, very well located as well.
Yeah, it's a good name, yeah.
I think it was very successful. I think it did exactly what it was intended to do, which was to highlight more innovative, better designed private housing in Milton Keynes and actually in the wider world.
It was successful. All right. And by successful, we meant there was 140,000 people who came to see it. It got very good publicity. Milton Keynes turned from a backward thing looking at concrete cows to a forward thing solving the nation's problems. And the Development Corporation, that fitted their, their reason for living really was to make something that was of the now and in the future.
I think what we hoped, amongst other things, and it wasn't a forlorn hope, it was quite a calculated hope, was that we would innovate and produce an exhibition which showed what you could do if you were an imaginative builder. And we were hoping that the building industry would pick that up and run with it, and we would end up with an overall enhancement of housing standards in the UK. That didn't happen because the builders were not so interested in that aspect. They just wanted to sell houses. Sorry to be rude about our building industry.
I don't think it was successful in the sense that innovative housing was suddenly understood and implemented and people were getting excited by it. But in terms of the original aim, which was crudely political, I suppose, I think it was successful because the house building in Milton Keynes took off, the private house building sector.
40 years later, we're still wanting to commemorate it. And also it led to Energy World. And without Homeworld, there wouldn't have been Energy World. And Energy World was very important, not necessarily the city, but energy conservation generally.
David Crewe was marketing director, or some such title. Very important role in a city which is always promoting itself. And I think it's no coincidence that he inherited the task, the responsibility of making that whole exhibition work, because marketing is what it was all about. Marketing something a little bit unusual and therefore needing a bit more innovation in the way you market. And so there was things like there was a money program house which was going to market us to the city, no less. I think it was quite correct that David Crewe was the person to lead on all of that and make sure that we were giving proper emphasis to marketing.
I've always regarded Homeworld as very politically significant, bearing in mind it was at a time when there was a crucial change of government from a Labour government to a Margaret Thatcher-led government which believed in the private sector, the market, and less government. Homeworld was able to show that Milton Keynes was agile, that it could change its vision with the political times. And then, of course, Margaret Thatcher became quite a fan of Milton Keynes. She visited 2 or 3 times, and Milton Keynes, therefore, had put its seal on its ability to work with a Conservative government. Politically significant, Homeworld? Absolutely.
Just the bonhomie of being part of a team with all different people, from architects to site workers to developers, all working together in a common cause. That was a kind of minor reflection, really, of working for the Development Corporation and working on Milton Keynes. There's fascination that you're involved in a collective project with lots of other people who have all their different opinions and different views, but all see the whole as being more important than the individual experiences.